Exactly 3 years ago, I started the podcast. I put out this trailer called Episode Zero, Initializing. This came out of wanting to have long conversations with people doing cool stuff with maps. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time in 2021, leading up to that year. I was listening to a lot of really long conversations. I've talked about it before. I was listening to people like Lex Friedman, I think at the time was still called the AI podcast, and I wanted to listen to conversations with people building some of the companies that were doing Earth observation stuff and mapping stuff. I couldn't find anything. So I thought, hey, maybe I will try to do something myself. And so how hard can it be? How hard can it be to try to do something? So I just threw it out there, and yeah, started just recording conversations. And now we are just a little bit later, a few years later, and episode 64 went out on 1st of April, which is not a great time to record and send out things on April 1st because the internet goes a little bit crazy. And tomorrow, on April 15th, episode number 65 will come out, and I'm pretty happy about that, which I think is going to be pretty cool. So yeah, sometimes it's fun to just start projects and see where they go. This is a little bit a part of that. Usually I'm asking questions to people. I have someone. One of the reasons I start off every single time asking people the same question is because when I had Ian Woodhouse, episode number 1, I'm actually not showing it on this website because I still haven't uploaded the backlog of all these other episodes. But when I had Ian Schuler, the very first person I had on, thank you so much, Ian, for just giving me your time. I don't think we ever talked before. I asked him, hey, how do you describe yourself? And I thought it was a pretty cool question. So I just rolled with it. And now every time I ask it, it's kind of nice because then I don't know if it shows, but I'm usually really stressed when I have people on, even after doing this 65 times. I feel like I know a little bit what I'm doing, especially when it's in person. It's also a little bit stressful, but even if I do it, from the comfort of home here, it's still really stressful sometimes. So asking the same question is also a way to just be more comfortable. So, this is also a little bit new. So the way I'm going to do this is what I wanted to do today is I asked some of you on Twitter and on a bunch of other places if you had any questions. I like when people do that, when they answer questions. If you have any questions, you can add them in the YouTube chat as well. And if I figure out how to do this properly, I will also take any questions from the chat. Basically, I just want to try something new for this third anniversary of the podcast, trying to break the barrier a little bit. Usually it's edited thing, a prepared thing with just one person. It's when I feel comfortable. So hey, let's try something different. So, let's kind of just start and dive into it. So I am going to come back to me. Whoa, look at that. This is so professional. I know what I'm doing. Aravind asked a bunch of questions. I have had Aravind in the past before, by the way. Actually, so let me bring back this other. You can look at this website. This website is so cool. You can just go on there and find different episodes. So I've had Aravind before. We talked about some really cool stuff about Earth observation, and he asked a bunch of questions. He used to have a podcast. He doesn't run it anymore. I think he's talked about bringing it back. And so he asked, who is your dream guest? And then he also said, why is it Joe Morrison? And Joe Morrison is this fella. I've had him on the podcast as well before. I'm going to say it's not Joe. It's, wait, let me make sure I can still see the chat if there's anything. There's actually, I have a list of people that I would like to talk to. I curate this list. There's a lot of things on the back end. I have this big Notion data page of all the people that I would think would be interesting. And so I wrote down a few like really, really interesting ones. There's one that I've named multiple times, kind of as a joke, but actually not really, which is Jack Dangermond. I would love to have Jack Dangermond on the podcast. If you don't know who Jack Dangermond is, it's very easy. He is the CEO of this company called Esri. Not only is he the CEO, he's also the founder. And Esri was started a pretty damn long time ago, in 1969. I don't even know, depending on what time, like people hadn't even landed on the moon yet. Like this is how old Esri is. And one of the things that I find incredibly interesting with Jack and Laura, I think his wife is that they own Esri. They, as far as I can tell, from what I've been told, they did not raise any money. Esri is a private company. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that I like conversations around business models and just asking people how they make money, how they raise money, what their business models, what they sell is. And a thing that you see often is you start a project, you bootstrap it, which means that you self-fund it, and then after a while, you find a project that you think has a lot of potential. You go to investors, you say, hey, this is my cool idea for a new map-related thing or whatever. And you raise a ton of money, and now people sit on your board, and they now have decision-making power. They can say, hey, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. And they don't just say, I think you should do that. It's like, I have money and this, you need to do this now. And Esri is this giant company that's been around for a really long time, and yet they still own all of it, which means they probably have a lot of money as well. And that's not very interesting on its own. What I find really interesting is Jack is 78, 79. I find that very funny, by the way. We don't actually know how old Jack is. Like, is this mysterious guy we don't really know a lot about? And I've been wanting to ask him this one question for, like, when I started the podcast, it was one of the things that I wrote. I wrote this list 3 years ago, like people I'd like to talk to and what would I want to talk to them. And I think on that very first list, Jack was up there. And one of the questions is like, why are you still doing this? You could do anything you want. You have this business. You own probably the entire business with your wife. Why keep working a lot? Like, as far as I can tell, he's still running Esri. And so why is he doing all of that? And I just find that I would find that conversation fascinating about, like, it's clearly not about the money at this point. So what is it? Why is he, keeping on going? I'd love to have that conversation about starting a project that started as this landscape project. It grew, like, Esri is just massive. There's a lot. I'd love to ask him about his thoughts on, modern mapping software and where it's going. There's how he built a company. I've heard anecdotes and from people. So I don't know if this is still the case today, but I've heard that people at Esri are paid hourly. So you're not paid a yearly salary, but you're paid hourly. It matches. And what I've heard is that he started doing this because when he was either an intern or was working, one of his first jobs, he got basically screwed over by the way he was paid. And he was like, the people I'm going to work with, they're going to be paid hourly. And so if they work long hours, at least they're going to be paid for it. And I would like to ask that to him. Like, these are the types of question that I would really like to be able to ask someone like a Jack. And I would find that super interesting. So that's one person. The other person that is probably not also going to be that surprising if you've ever listened to me talk about the podcast is, let's see if I can bring him up again, Johnny Harris. Johnny Harris is someone I would really love to be able to talk to. He's, just a little YouTuber on the platform, 5 million subscribers, just a little guy. And the reason I would like to do that is because I think his impact on how maps are viewed online, consumed and used to tell stories is really big. The impact of Johnny learning how to do map animations and using them to tell story and using maps as a central piece to his stories is something that I find fascinating. I'm also, I would totally fanboy. I'm not going to lie. Like, that would also be a part of it. I'm just checking, because I still don't really know what I'm doing, if the stream is still working. Are people still around? It seems like it's working. If there's actually anybody, could you please just send me a message in the chat that says, like, hey, actually we can hear what you're saying. I just want to make sure I'm not talking in the void as well. That would be pretty funny for a guy that's been recording podcasts that actually you can't hear anything. So if you could just please do that, so I actually know if, one, there's anybody watching, and two, if you can hear anything I've been saying all along. In the meantime, I'll come back to Johnny. So Johnny, there's a few things I would love to, I think he made How I Make My Maps. He made this video of how he makes maps. And so it's this, I will mute this. It's basically like how he does it in Adobe After Effects. It's an ad for Intel, which is very funny. But he basically shows you, like, okay, this is how I bring in my data and everything. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I would love to nerd on. Like, how, I know he doesn't do all of it himself now, but like the how he does it would be a very interesting piece, because he puts a lot of thought into it. And I think it's in this video, or in one of his video, he talks about how he's self-taught. He just learned how to do that. He was working at Vox Media before. And thank you, Just Rocket Science, for saying everything nominal. Great. So I'll just keep on going, pretend everything goes well. Thanks for mentioning that. So Johnny, for the maps, like, that's the one thing that's interesting and very obvious. How he communicates online, I think that's so important as well. There's a lot of people, I think, in the very scientific sphere, especially, people working at NASA Earth, at ESA, people working at a lot of these organizations, public organizations, and some private, where I think we sometimes imagine that we're going to put this data out there and so many people are going to use it, it's going to change the world. And I think one of the realizations I've had is that you really need to tell a story as well. Like, people are really busy. People have so many things going on. People are have a lot going on. And if you show a big chart, it's not going to necessarily land of like, oh, this is the impact. There's a story of, why did we collect this data in the first place? Why are we deciding to show you this histogram and not that one? There's a lot going on. And I think Johnny does an amazing job at putting that into a compelling package. The second thing is, I think the dude has just an amazing history. He was in the Mormon church, and he left the church, and I think he met his wife at the Mormon in the Mormon church. and he decided to like start recording and taking videos of everything he's done. He's talked about his time in the Mormon church and like regretting some of the things that he's done there. And I think the guy has just an incredible story that I would love to talk about and ask more questions about. That's where a lot of these conversations stem from. So there's the whole like, how do you tell stories around maps? I think would be fascinating. And then the history of the guy and how he's learned to do that and became this big journalist, I think is the word he would use more than YouTuber. He really emphasizes the journalism aspect. So that's another person. Then on the staying on YouTube, because I think there's an incredible wealth of really cool people doing fun stuff on YouTube. There's this guy called Rainbolt that I would love to talk about. And if you need any reason, like look at this header. Like, why would I not want to talk to a guy that has a header called Google Maps? And what I find super interesting with this guy is, I don't know how old he is. He's got to be less than like 25. I think he's got to be, maybe he's 25, something like that. He might be my age. And he's built an entire career for himself out of playing GeoGuessr. So you're dropped somewhere and he has to try to figure out like where he is.
2 years ago, I posted my first TikTok.
So like playing GeoGuessr and like trying to find like based on the location where you are. And this guy's built an entire career out of just doing that. First of all, he's incredibly good at what he does. Like that's one thing. Like the guy is just really good. And then, you know, the whole figuring out how he uses Google Maps, what he thinks of it, how he finds the location, like the whole mapping aspect. Again, that's the bedrock. That's the first thing that I'm curious about. That's the first thing that I would want to know from someone. But then there's the how do you make a career about a video game that is, you know, comes and goes. It's like a online game. Like I'm a pretty big gamer. I really like video games. This is a thing we might talk about later. There's so much in video games that the tech industry is very close to. Like Google Maps, Google Earth, they all started, close to video game tech. But the relevancy of games comes and goes at a speed that is really fast these days, especially when, you know, this guy does things on TikTok. Things come and go like so quickly. And yet he's been doing this for quite a while now. There's, you know, I don't know when he started doing this, but like he really blew up like, okay, a year ago. It's not that much. YouTube tends to not show the date properly. So yeah, basically 2 years ago is when he started YouTube, but he was already really big on TikTok at the time. So he's been doing this for a couple years, and I would love to nerd out on like, okay, what is he seeing from, Google Maps? I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of the people who knows Google Street View the most. Maybe like I'm talking individuals, not like Google as a whole. And so I'd love to talk about, you know, does he just know the images at some point? Like you drop him in Kenya and he's actually seen that picture before of that specific road. Like, is it just he's seen it that much? Could he tell you which countries get updated the most? You know, things that like you could find someone working at Google who could tell you that. But I think it's really fascinating when someone just is so interested in a thing. Like it's just a different way of thinking about maps, and I just love it. So he's one of the guys that I would love to also talk to and have on the podcast. Switching gears completely, there's someone else that I would like to talk to, which is William Marshall. I mean, his it's a bit no, this is not the person that I want. I want Will Marshall from Planet. This guy. I would love to talk to this guy. And there's multiple reasons for that. the first is like he started Planet, which in my opinion is the big new space company that started a lot of the modern Earth observation stuff. If you don't know at this point, I work. This is not my full-time job. I work in Earth observation stuff, and Planet has really like changed a lot of what commercial Earth observation is. So like talking about how he started, I've been reading Ashley Vance's book. So this is going to be on e-reader, so I don't know if you can see very well. I can probably find it online. There we go. When the Heavens Went on Sale. So Ashley Vance is the guy who wrote the first Elon Musk biography. And in that book, in When the Heavens Went on Sale, he basically tells the whole founding story of Planet Labs and how it's a pretty wild like Silicon Valley story and everything, but the character that he paints of what Will is this like really dedicated, really smart, pretty nerdy, asocial guy as well. And now he's the CEO of this really big company that happens to be a public company now as well. So you have to go from being this nerdy kid who is going to start this company. You're going to monitor the whole Earth. I think like he had really big ideals, not ideas, also ideas, but ideals of what the world should be like and what would happen if only we could monitor all of the Earth all the time. And now he's the CEO of a publicly traded company. And Planet is not doing very well. If you look at their stock and you look at, compared to when they went public, all these companies, they're not doing super well. And I would love to know what he thinks about that, because I think the promise of we're going to monitor the Earth every single day and we're going to create an enormous amount of value, not necessarily for shareholders, but for the world, is really interesting to me. And I would love to ask him how he conflates that between the value for humanity and the value for shareholders, which clearly is a complicated thing. So, and he sounds like just this really interesting human being as well. And I would like to understand how the guy thinks. This is the premise behind the podcast. It's really understanding how do people think. And so Will Marshall sounds like someone who is interesting. I was just trying to pull up the website. I don't remember what my tagline is there. But basically, the whole reason why it's called Minds Behind Maps is because I want to talk to the people making the cool stuff and understanding how they think. And Will Marshall is definitely someone that looks like he would have some interesting stuff to say and some cool stories. So Aravind, when he asked the question like who are our dream guests and why is it Joe Morrison, I gotta say I want to have Joe on the podcast again. Joe's a friend at this point. Let me pull Joe's Twitter up. I've had him on the podcast a few times. He'd be really cool. I would love to have follow-up conversations. I think that's also really interesting. I've had him on a few years ago, and Joe's been doing some pretty cool stuff at Umbra. One of the biggest things I would love to talk about is the gamble that Umbra has been doing. So if you don't know, Umbra is this SAR, synthetic aperture imagery. Oh, wow. Their website links, their link tree links to their S3 bucket. That's a power move right there. So they have this open data program, which I think is incredibly cool. You can have, you saw it right there. I go download open data. It's an S3 bucket. There's no sign in. There's no anything. And they've basically sent a ton of money to let's just make open free data and we'll just put it out there without any licensing. There's licensing, but what it means is like you can do whatever you want. And I think that's an incredibly cool move. But that's what I think. That's what I and a bunch of people think. Doesn't mean it's the best thing for the company. And when I had Joe on the first time, it was a couple years ago, and we were talking about them starting to do this. And it's been a couple years now. And so I'd love to talk about, okay, how has it been? What has been the payoff of this gamble? Has it paid off yet? Yes or no? And why are they doing it? Why are they continuing to do it? And what is he thinking about the status of it? Are they going to keep doing it? So yeah, Joe is definitely someone I'd love to have on again. Overall, like I get asked sometimes, like, how do I find people? Who are the people that I want to talk to? Usually it's the people that I would have wanted to talk to or before, like even without having a podcast. When I read an interesting book and I'm like, whoa, I would love to ask follow-up questions to this person. Or when I hear someone do a talk, or sometimes when I just work with someone and I just want to talk to them. So there's recurring themes like authors of books, people who make YouTube videos. I've talked about that a couple times now. People who are just doing cool things and writing about it. Joe used to have, still has a newsletter. He doesn't write there anymore. He hasn't done that in a while. But people who have interesting opinions and ideas, I think, make for great conversations. And then you can ask, like, places where you disagree as well, like respectful, fair, not fair, that's not the word I'm looking for. Good faith. Good faith is the word that I'm looking for. Like, that's really important. People that I can see they're going to have an argument in good faith and I might not necessarily agree with. Those are the people that I tend to find the most interesting. All right. So, wow, it's been half an hour. I've done one question. This is where it's cool to only have a few people watching and just a few questions, because if I had thousands of questions and I spent half an hour on each, this would last forever. So another question that Arvin asked, this is an interesting one as well, is if I gave you $1 million right now, what would you spend it on? And so this was in regards to YouTube and podcasting specifically. It's not like, oh, go start a company. It's regarding like this whole podcast. What would I do it on? And so the first few things that come to mind is, oh, I'd just do more of this. Basically, like the boring answer is I would just do more of what I'm already doing. I would try to do, multitasking while doing things live is really tricky. So if you look at what I have, this is kind of like the public YouTube facing thing. The podcast is a bit hard to show because it's just a dumb RSS feed. So what I would love to do is things like this, is have a conversation with things like this, immediately clicks to like a promo at the moment of the episode. The sponsorship. Yeah, there we go. Is in-person interviews. I would love to have more in-person interviews. Is there a wide shot somewhere? So there we go. This is the CEO of TomTom and the founder of TomTom. So this is the guy that 33 years ago started TomTom. I love doing these in-person interviews. It takes forever to do. This took a long time to actually just get their approval to like do. This takes a whole day to go in the field to record. Like you can see there's, the microphones. We have the table. I have one camera here, one camera there, one camera here. That's slightly out of focus, by the way. The microphones set up, like all of that. It takes forever. It costs a lot to do. It's just me. I don't even have a crew. Like I wouldn't even imagine what would cost to have a crew. But there's something about sitting in front of someone and hanging out with them a little bit before and just getting to know them and showing to people like, hey, I want to have a conversation together. Let's really just sit down and tell me how you're thinking. One of the things I'd love to do is go to India and go see Pixel. No, not Pixel. Oh my God. Okay, in fairness, I wrote a typo. These guys are doing hyperspectral stuff in India, and they are building a constellation of satellites. They're going to do 5-meter spatial resolution hyperspectral imaging. They just opened this huge factory in India. And so basically they're taking hey, we want to make really cool stuff, but we're not in Silicon Valley. We're in this other part of the world. Let's make it happen. Investment is different, and the expectations are different. And I would love to. I could have a podcast recording remotely, but I would love to do travel and go there. There's this also very big YouTuber called Real Engineering, and Brian is the guy who runs it, and they do these in-person stuff more and more. They're doing these tours of factories, and they're going and seeing like, okay, cool, you're making this hypersonic airplane. How are you building it? Like, show us. Don't just tell me how you're doing it. Like, show me. And he's in the fab. Also, they have just this sick 3D animation. Like, this cost a lot of money to make. This is ridiculous how much it costs to make. Like, look at this. It feels like it's a documentary you'd see on TV. Like, it's just stupid how much this cost. But like, this is their footage. I think Brian is in one of the shot. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Like, this is the guy. And so this is not just some stock footage or something that the company sent them. Funnily enough, Bangalore, where Pixel is located, is known as the Silicon Valley of India, just rocket science. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know about these places, and so I would love to learn about that. And Heifi, about like, I'll get to your question. Can I share some of the coolest geospatial projects I've seen? I'll get to that in a little bit. But so if I had a truckload of money, this is what I would do. I would do more of these things. I was just talking about Umbra. I mean, they're in California, arguably the most known place in the world. But that's one of the things that I would do. And it would just be for the podcast. The thing that I've been spending most of my time on these days is, at least thinking, is also just working on this second channel. Well, it has my name on it, so I don't know if I can really call it a second channel. And this, but basically, like, making these 20-minute videos explaining how satellite images work, how radar satellite works, how a bunch of things work like that in a different format than the podcast. I would really want to do more of these because I can reach a much larger audience, potentially. And what I'm thinking at the moment is that the podcasts are these really deep dive places. They're basically where getting ideas and getting the information comes from. And then these are just different formats to tell that information to other people that might not be interested in sitting for 2 hours for a conversation. Just because I find that interesting doesn't mean everybody does. I think podcasting is an incredible medium, but I think it's not the one to reach a lot of people. And that's totally fair. But what I would love to do, there's something I've been thinking about, is I think there's a bit of lack of optimism and excitement about engineering at the moment and science in general. Like, forget just the geospatial stuff, but like people being excited about tech and about engineering and about like how we can solve problems. There's a lot of doom and gloom, especially around climate change, for example, which is the reason we know about a lot of climate change is because we have satellites that have been observing the Earth for 50 years. And we can see that trend. And we can see what's going on. We can really measure what's going on. And so I think we've been sometimes in a lot of the pessimism. And I think that's really important to recognize that, like, hey, this is a really big deal. Like, everything that's happening is really tricky, but there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do. And there's a lot of really interesting, really clever, really smart people working on these things. And I'd love to share some of that excitement and continue funding some of these videos, because these are stupid. I mean, you can see how long it took to make. There's 7 months ago and then 1 month ago. There's 6 months between these two projects. And this one took 4 months to make. These are ridiculous in how long they take to make, because I have a day job that actually funds all of this. And then the podcast on the side, and this is kind of the scraps. I have so many ideas for things to do there. One big one I would love to do is a documentary, or just a longer series, a longer video on how we got to Landsat and Copernicus. I had Barbara Ryan on a few years ago on what? YouTube. Come on, this is not what I'm asking for. Oh my goodness. Search is so broken. Maybe it's another more famous person called Barbara Ryan. I don't know. Where is she? I think this was one of the first people I had on in person. And she is an amazing person, first of all, but she was instrumental in making Landsat open, because up until 2008, basically Landsat, you had to pay for it. So the project started in 1972, and then in 2008 is when it starts becoming free, and it explodes. Like, the number of people who start using Landsat just explodes. In 2016, Copernicus, the ESA program, starts. It'd been, working and developed for a really long time, but in 2016, I think 2016, the dates don't really matter, the exact dates. And ESA's like, we're going to do Copernicus with Sentinel-2, Sentinel-1, up to like Sentinel-6, I think. Like, all these projects, these programs. And the data is going to be free. Anybody in the world can just get the data and use it, start companies, do whatever they want with it. And Landsat is still going on. And now, at least you can get all of that data for free. Now, it doesn't mean it costs nothing to download the data and process it and all of that. But we have these really expensive satellites with a lot of people still working on them. There's a lot of maintenance and operations. And basically, the monitoring of the Earth, at least at these scales and on these sensors, is open for anybody to take a look. That's a pretty incredible feat, that anybody in the world with a laptop, and a bit of know-how and maybe a few AWS credits, can just start poking questions at that data. I find that incredible. And to me, it's just mind-blowing that it happened. Like, it doesn't add up in my head. Like, how did you convince, the European Commission that, like, this was a project that was worth it? And a lot of money came back into the programs in Copernicus and in Landsat, and I'm sure that was a big part. It's like, we're going to create new jobs and new companies and new industries and things like that. But that's what I'd love to understand, and I think it's not just one podcast recording, because it's not just one person, it's many, many different people. And so I think it would be about doing some of these multiple interviews and then lining it up and then creating probably a documentary and just showing the excitement. Like, look at this project that we have here. You can see the entire Earth. Okay. One of my favorite projects is EO Browser. If you're listening to me right now, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably heard about this before. But this is stupid. It's incredible. Like, you can just go anywhere. So I'm going to be here. If you've ever wondered what my last name means, it means the Normand. This is where I'm from in France. And so we're just gonna go like, oh, of course, this is very funny. The only area that doesn't have image is great. All right, let's go 1 week earlier. Oh, come on. Okay, let's go to Paris then. Doesn't matter. This is Paris. What is it? Today. What? No. Is that today? Yeah, and then 2 days ago. And then a week ago. I mean, sure, there are clouds and everything, but like the fact that I can just do this is stupid. It's wild. The amount of information, like I've had many people talk about it, but it's ridiculous. It's stupid that you can just have access to that everywhere and like for nearly the entire globe. I know Sentinel-1 is down now, one of the Sentinel-1s. But like the amount of information that is out there for people to just try stuff is wild. And I get really excited about that. Like it's still a thing that gets me super excited. I got into this industry because there's open source data and then there's open source tools like Python and things like that. ZT engineering, we take it for granted. Exactly, we do take it for granted. One of the things that Barbara said in here, I don't know if I can see the transcripts. I think she mentions it. And she says, you'll have to look it up. There we go.
In my home country, the United States, you also cannot take these things for granted. So not only was there a long history to get there, there's no assurances that it's going to be that way out into the future. So one has to be diligent and vigilant about continuing to communicate. And that's actually, Max, that's why I very much appreciate this dialogue.
Okay, you get the gist. This sentence has been living in my head for a really long time. Well, since 2 years, since we did this. This idea that like, oh, I was like, whoa, this is such a cool story and we've gotten to this point. And she's like, no. Wait, let me do a dramatic change. No, you don't understand. This is not a thing that's a given now. We have to keep fighting for these things to stay something that we're going to keep doing. And that idea that like, we have this today, but it doesn't mean it's going to keep going is something that really wants me to also show to people like, hey, look, we've got this really cool thing. I know we've had it for a while now. I know we've had Landsat for 15 years for free, and we've had Copernicus for nearly a decade. But let's just take a moment to appreciate it as well. And like I owe my career to some of these things, and so I would love to be able to share that to some people as well. Okay, so back to the question that was at hand was like basically, okay, what would I do with $1 million? There's one last thing that I want to mention on that. If Aravind wants to give me $1 million and there's no strings attached, I'll probably take it. But the way that a lot of companies raise money is not with no strings attached. And that is the thing that would probably make me not want to take the money in the first place. If you said to me, hey, I'm going to invest $1 million, but I want like half of the equity of the podcast or like decision making or whatever, I probably won't do that, because what I think is cool is that I just get to do whatever the heck I want. I want to try a live stream, not really knowing how to live stream. I'll just do it. It doesn't really matter. And if there's just, 5 people watching, so be it. And it'll be fun and we'll see where it goes. And another thing I'm quite proud of is that the podcast isn't full of ads. You go on the podcast, you listen to an episode, there is one sponsor, one. there's not that many podcasts that only have one sponsor. A lot of them, they have, for a conversation that's, an hour 15, they have 3, 4, 5. I don't need to do that. I'm not making much money from this podcast, but I don't have to, at least not now. And maybe in the future I will have to, but I get to decide how and when I want to do that. And so taking money also means like someone now gets to look at that and have these decisions. And someone gets to look at the balance sheet and say, like, I put $1 million in this. How do I get 2, 3, 4, 5 million bucks out of it? So now I need to find a way to generate that much money. And in a finite amount of time, maybe in 7, 8 years. So a lot of investment is an incredible tool. Like some of the companies that I've been talking about, like Pixel, for example, let's just take them because I have the browser open. They're a very cool project, and they are probably not possible without specifically venture capital. But I think it's also cool to have projects actually like Synergize, the company that was behind EO Browser that now got acquired by Planet. That's a whole other story. A story that I covered on the podcast, by the way. Little plug right there. But there are projects like Synergize where they did all of this thing without raising any money, and they get to decide what they do. Planet wants to acquire them. They're like, yeah, let's find out if we want to do that. And so one of the things that I think isn't really discussed a lot, and is one of the things I try to talk about on the podcast, is kind of the cost of money, which is a bit of maybe a weird concept to talk about, but it's what are you giving up if someone gives you a lot of money? And so I'd love to make, more in-person podcasts, have a team that helps me. I already have Peter who helps edit some of the videos. I worked with an animator, Abram, who helped me do some of the really sick animations on the videos that I was doing before. So here, some of the animations that are done here like this. I didn't do this. I had a really cool animator who helped me do some of these because I would never have done that. When I don't know how to animate things, it looks like this. That's not really the same kind of vibe. It still works, but I love being able to work with people, and I would love to be able to work with more people. But the giving up the decision making and like caring about all the details and not having to make as much money behind, I think that's a very high price that I would have to have long conversations about, like, what am I giving up for your money? So shameless plug, if you want to help me do that and keep it, low ad free, there's a Patreon. Ta-da! There's also behind the scenes on how the podcast runs. Isn't that like a smooth transition, by the way? Anyways, that was not the goal, but I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was a really interesting question. Like, hey, what would you do if you had all this money? Which I think is a really cool question. It's really interesting to think about. Like, even in your career, like, hey, if tomorrow someone just gave me $1 million, would I leave my job? Like, I think it's just a cool question to ask in your life. I think that's a good place to start rounding that question off, because now we're at nearly another half hour for just one question. Marlene asks, how many patrons do you have right now? And ultimately, the listeners are your clients, the ones benefiting. Okay. This is going to be a long... this could be a long conversation about the status of the internet. At the moment, you can see how many patrons I have. You can see how much money I make. If I open a incognito tab, so imagine like I'm one of you and I go to that link. So I'm just gonna, put it in there. You do whatever you want. But just saying, if you want to see, you can see how many people are subscribed and how much money I make. Note that this is not paying members. This is total members. I think you might be even able to see there's 24 people who pay. per month. There's about a month. Every episode gets about 1,500 YouTube downloads, YouTube views and downloads. In general, like the given is when you start something like a Patreon or whatever it is, like this paid membership stuff, about 1% of your total audience is kind of expected to join. So this is actually way more than 1%. 1% would be 15 or 10. It really depends. So I count myself pretty lucky in that on that regard. And I would love, my goal, to your point, Marlene, I would love not to have to take any sponsorship. I would love to say, like, there's enough people on Patreon and, you know, a big enough audience that actually means that enough people contributing makes a reasonable amount of money, that this is basically funded by the people who appreciate it. That is not how the internet works today. The internet is funded by ads. Whether we like it or not, that's kind of how the biggest, projects on the internet are funded. One of my favorite examples outside of mapping is YouTube is one of the companies that I find the most fascinating. They've built a program where people can watch videos for free, and the people who make them still get a bunch of money for it. That would be okay. Like, that would be a thing in and of itself. What I think is really interesting is you can pay YouTube, you can pay for premium, and you can say, I don't want to watch ads. Here's my money. I don't want to watch any ads. And as long as YouTube is not going to change that deal, they're going to be like, oh, by the way, we're going to add ads. I think it's an amazing deal. The people who don't want to or can't afford it, you're a student, you can't afford it, fine. I was a student. I couldn't afford it for a really long time. You can still watch it. And I think that's amazing. Actually, you know what? Really side tangent. If you hate the ads on YouTube and you have, for whatever reason, you don't like Spotify, you don't like any of the podcast platforms, you can go to the website right now and you can... You can download... Oh, it's not here anymore. There we go. You can download an MP3. You can do that, no questions asked. You can go ahead and download the MP3. This is something that I think is really cool. Not every podcast allows you to do that, but this is something that I cared about being able to do, is that you can do that. You can just download the MP3 and do whatever you want with it. But back to YouTube, you can, I make a little bit of money every time you watch something on YouTube. I don't if you listen to it on RSS. So YouTube has figured this out, like how to get people to make profitable stuff on the internet. And I think that's really cool. This is, if you wonder how much money I make on YouTube, this is how much I made over the last 3 months. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you scale those numbers, like, people can make a living doing that. And I think that's pretty cool. And so convincing people that, like, on top of that, like, can you please give me money to pay this so that I can keep doing is such a hard ask. And so I am incredibly grateful that there are people who, first of all, listen to what I'm doing. And then second of all, decide to give me money. And Marlene, I think you're one of those people. So thank you very much. It means a lot that people are like, hey, I really like what you're doing. Here's some money. Please keep doing that. This is the internet that I would love to keep seeing. I try to pay as much as I can the people that I think are doing things that I like. And so, my God, I just keep going on tangents. But let me tell you one other story. I need to try to find it. By the way, while I do that, Goba. Okay, you put your message in French. Let me try to live translate. Hi, I'm a GIS specialist and I love your channel. I started a challenge in the next few days. That's pretty cool. I'm really glad if you're starting new stuff. Okay. This podcast I used to really, really like. And I say I used to because the last time they posted was a long time ago. For podcasts, like it was, I mean, like that was in November, but then they stopped in April. I really like this podcast, and it's one of the podcasts that got me started, just listening to podcasts in this industry. And then one day, they stopped. Basically, they switched hosts, but Alistair, oh God, I forgot the name of the other host. I haven't listened to this in a while, and so I forget. I'm very sorry. But the two hosts that started it basically stopped. And part of the reason was like, hey, it's a lot of work and we can't really justify it anymore. And they didn't have sponsors and they didn't take, money from people that were enjoying the show through something like a Patreon, because I asked them. And fair enough. But the end result is the same, as they stopped posting stuff. They stopped putting out a show that I got a lot of value from. And that made me pretty sad. I think the internet was just a little bit worse with them not posting anymore. And I really wish they would keep posting, because I got a lot of value from what their work was doing. And so if I could have kept, if I could have paid a few dollars here and there, a few euros per month, to just also say like, hey, I actually really appreciate what you're doing, I would have did that. I would have done that. And so that's why it was just an example that really hit home that like, this is not some hypothetical idea that like, if you don't do it, like, it'll stop. It's like, if things aren't sustainable, they stop because it doesn't work. And so at some point, motivation runs out, or money runs out, or other things come up in life. And that was the moment where I was like, well, it's not about like thinking like, oh, I want to be a service of other people. It's, I want to keep making that. I want to keep making this show. We're here for the 3rd anniversary today, which is very cool. I didn't think I'd make it this far. I would love to do this same thing in 3 years. And then in 6 years. And, I would love to be able to celebrate Minds Behind Maps' 10th anniversary in 7 years. It sounds like it's so far apart from here. And many things can happen. But if it's, sustainable, if it means that there's money in it and you can justify it, then it's a lot easier to keep going. Motivation comes in and comes out. And especially when, you have a family, you have an actual job that pays the bills. When things get tricky, you just drop whatever you can drop. And so, once again, I'm incredibly thankful to the people who listen and to the people who support it as well. That's so cool. Mo asks, podcast with Johnny Harris when? Dude, I just talked about it like 20 minutes ago. So that's on you. Thanks for showing up, man. Ryan, happy birthday, Minds Behind Maps. I know, right? Thank you so much. And thanks for listening. Okay, to get to Hazaf's question, could you please share some of the coolest geospatial projects you've ever seen? I will tie that into a question by Anu that also asked on Twitter, like, what is a project that hasn't been built that I would love to see? I couldn't think of anything, so I was going to show some projects that I think are pretty cool. So Anu, sorry, I don't have a good answer to your question. So Hafez, we're going to do what I was thinking about. Okay, the first one, let's start with a bit of a meme because I try to be serious, but I think sometimes it's nice to not be too serious. If you don't know Terrible Maps on Twitter, it's hilarious. This is basically a collection of just terrible maps. It's dumb. It's just memes. But it's my kind of stuff. it's just very funny. Horniest place in Africa. Look at this. Who comes up with these ideas? This is really dumb. It's not a serious project, but like, come on, you can't help but laugh at these things. Okay, that's not a real answer, but I just wanted to plug that one in. Marlene, I only joined earlier, so maybe you talked about it, but how many hours a week do you devote to it? Probably 10 to 20 hours a week at the moment. Something like that. Maybe not 20. It depends on the days, because like 8 hours is a full day. Yeah, there's probably weeks where it's 20 hours a week. I think I wrote a blog, not a blog post, but I think I wrote about that on the website as well a little while ago. On sponsor. Maybe you've never bothered going. And I don't mean you specifically, I just mean in general. Websites are a bit of a dying breed. I wrote a little bit about how I make money and why I want to tell you. And in there, I was saying 30 hours per episode at the moment. This was written a little while ago. Yeah, last updated, a little while ago. So 30 hours an episode, 2 episodes a month. So that's like 15 hours every week on average. Yeah, checks out. It hasn't changed too much. I work less on the podcast now and more on the videos because we've become more efficient at editing and reaching out to people and everything. Okay. Another cool project is David Rumsey's map collection. This is the kind of stuff I want to see more of on the internet. I don't really quite know who this is or like what project this is, but I will drop this in the chat if you want to go check it out. You can check it's at first you can check like by map. So I can put like Paris and it shows me like all the maps of like Paris. Okay, cool. So far not super interesting. Now you can search by text on maps. I want Paris, and it will show me all the maps they have indexed with the word Paris in them. This is very interesting now. What if we start looking for more weirder terms? So, like mines. And turns out there are maps with places called mines. And so my mind, haha, pun. Okay, it's not a map. It's technically the side of a thing called. Okay, this is the thing where sometimes you need to figure it out. But my brain, to not go use the word minds, looks at this and is like, oh, this is cool. I can make some pretty cool. You can make some cool montages of things just based around maps. Look at this one. Look at that. Like this project. This is like where computer vision projects are really cool. Like you can make some montages based around like really cool maps like that. I think you could find fictional places for example. Like I don't think if you put Mordor that would really work. Maybe it does. Oh my god, Mordor. It shows up on a reel. There we go. French Empire. This is Mordorf. Okay. It's a little bit wrong. But this is a pretty cool pretty cool project. Marlene, and your paid job. My paid job, I work 4 days a week now. So I've dedicated a whole day to working on the podcast. I don't make it back up in salary or whatever, but I get to work on what I love. Isn't that cool? Because one of the ways to look at it is that we have a pay job that gives us sufficient money to live, and the rest of our time we used to volunteer for making the world a better place. I would be a little bit hypocritical if I were saying like that because this is still a business that I'm trying to run. I'm still trying to make money. I'd love to spend more time doing this. I hope it's trying to make the world a better place. It's also just trying to make my life a little bit better. This is the stuff that I would love to do more of. But I agree with that. I think that's really important. I also like what I'm doing at my day job. I'm very fortunate in that sense. Musfik, don't delete the stream. I don't intend to delete the stream. Don't delete the stream, if you can do that. Maps are high res. It's a very cool project. Just Rocket Science, a map platform that I would love to see, a service that allows you to find and print large EO maps onto physical paper, then ship so that you can put on your wall. Oh, hey, Anu. Cool. There are some projects that are starting to do that. So I'm going to, this is another project that is pretty cool, and they are a sponsor of the podcast. So do of that what you want, but they are a sponsor of the podcast because they're doing cool stuff, and I'm not talking about them because they're a sponsor. They're doing cool stuff, which makes them a sponsor. And so the reason why I bring these ones up is because you can, here you can export 1080p by 1080p stuff. You can preview what it looks like, and you can also just do desktop. It doesn't print it, but you have like a pretty cool print of like, they make these monthly mosaics, and I've like send this to a few people. Like you can do pretty cool, like nice rendering, like super quick. Like it took 2 clicks to do. It's not quite the print, but one also cool project. Okay, there's a bunch of other stuff that I think are really, really interesting, and that gets me super excited at the moment. Are these idea of these foundational models for Earth observation. So there's a couple of them that are starting. This is a slide deck from the Earth genome, and they're working on Earth Index. They are trying to sell as a foundational model. So here are the slides if you want to find them. The idea is, okay, we have all this EO data. What if we make a giant foundational model, we get the embeddings, and then we build a interface on top, and every time you say, hey, I'm looking for something like that, show me every place on Earth that looks the same. That's the high-level idea of these foundational models, is let's take all the open data in the world. So I was talking about Landsat and Copernicus and all of those previously. We build a big model on it. We take the embeddings, so like what the model has learned, and then we reverse engineer the process. And so we say, hey, here's a snapshot of the Earth. So I would go on, any map, like you get the idea. Like you go on any map, you go here and you say, okay, show me everything that's similar around the Earth. And these projects are, first of all, like this part is incredibly interesting. The data scientist in me is like, ooh, this is very, very cool. The implications are unknown. We don't know what's going to happen if you give something like that to everyone. I'm trying to see if they have better examples of like what that looks like. So this project by the Earth Genome, you can't access it yet. It's in beta. There's another one called Clay, which has been started by the Clay Foundation, which Bruno Sanchez started. He was the person behind Microsoft Planetary Computer. And this project is open source as well. I think the Earth Index is also open source, but Clay is this new foundation started like a few months ago. They're doing basically the exact same thing. So these foundational models for Earth observation, like you're seeing those pop up everywhere. There's research papers left, right, and center. These are very cool stuff that I'm quite excited. I'll probably have some of the people on the podcast to talk about these because we don't quite have access to them. I know Clay here is going to be demoed their V1 is going to be demoed next month at SAT Summit, which is a conference in the US, in Washington, D.C. So literally in a month, they're going to demo this. And I'll most likely have them on the podcast to talk about that. So those are some of the projects that I'm quite excited about and I think are pretty cool at the moment. One that's also changing things up, like I've talked about it before, I've had them on the podcast. They've also sponsored the podcast before, is I think I have to go incognito to show it. Is Felt. Again, they've been a sponsor, and I'm talking about them not because they've been a sponsor, but they're a sponsor because they're a cool project. And this is like collaborative mapping. So what if you could have a map in the browser and instead of just one person working on it, it's multiple people? And you can send a link to a map and like people can actually view it in different things and like annotate it like multiple people, like a Google Docs or Notion or something like that. And I think that's quite interesting because I think it opens up a lot of different applications of what does a map mean if it's interactive and people can change it. It's not this static thing that you're rendering anymore, but it's a thing where people can collaborate on. It kind of gives it a whole new, you're just thinking about it differently. So that's something that I'm quite excited to see as well. All right, so that is that. Let me just quickly take a look at the chats. If there's any projects that you think are pretty cool that you want to share, let me know. I'm always looking for new stuff. I'm always looking for exciting projects or people. It's people first. When I have people on, it's always the people before their projects. Projects come and go. Well, unfortunately, people come and go as well. But the way people think is, to me, the interesting thing. What else? Okay. Also, Arvin asked, what would the podcast look like in 2026? When I first read that, I was like, oh, what do I want the podcast to look like in 5 years? And then I remembered 2026 is in 2 years. The number one thing that I want the podcast in 2 years is that it's still around. That's it. There's more. There's definitely more stuff that I want. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the first thing I want is that I'm still doing this. I would, unless for very good reason that I've decided to work on like an incredibly exciting other project, I would love to keep doing this. And that doesn't sound super exciting, but I want to make sure to cover that. Sometimes it's great to think about the next big thing, but I want to cover the basics first. I want to publish 2 episodes a month for the next few years, and that they're not boring. That would be even better. That they're actually genuine conversations that I want to have. It sounds very boring, but it's definitely the thing that I would want to keep doing. Okay, that's probably not the like genuine answer, but I answered that a little bit to, what would I do if I had more money to do this? I would love to make it better, have more in-person stuff. I really want to try to grow the other channel, making like these videos. I would love to have more of these. At the pace it's going, in 2 years, there's going to be 4 more videos. Because these take a really long time. But I would love to be able to still have the time, still have the energy, still have the motivation and the incentives to keep doing this, and to have more videos like this explaining how Earth observation, how satellites work, how maps work, why they're cool and why they're interesting. So yeah, that would be pretty cool. I wrote some notes about that. And I forgot about this, so I'm just going to read this. I hope I never become someone that doesn't provide value. There's a lot of noise out there, things that take away from you, that are not providing great value to people. I hope I'm able to keep being valuable. There's a sort of, I feel like, trend where the internet is really getting not as nice to hang around. There's people call this the enshittification of everything. And I sort of agree. There's a lot of people there's a lot of projects that become really big and they need to keep on going and they can't die, and it just gets a little bit worse. You go on, whatever, social media, blogs, like the internet is not as weird anymore as I think it used to be. It's all on just a few platforms now. I hope I don't become a part of the problem, however small. I don't want to make something that is successful at the expense of people like giving value. I think that would really annoy me. I think I'd be disappointed in myself if that's how it would happen. And, there's many reasons people need to make a living and stuff like that. But there's something about, I think, saying that out loud. Marlene writes, your podcast is not only very awesome, but you really have an amazing talent for picking the right people. Thank you. That's very kind. There's something about deciding that I'm only going to do this podcast twice a month. If you search like how to start a podcast and how to start doing stuff on the internet, that's also a question that Case Taylor asked. Like, if you had to start again from scratch, building the podcast and other social channels, what would you do differently? There's a bunch of things, but there's a few things I wouldn't do differently. And doing more is not something that I would do. I would not try to do more. I would not try to do an episode a week. I would not try to put out something every 3 days or every day. Like, I think that's terrible advice because it means that you have to make worse stuff. It's really good to iterate, and having a schedule is really important, I think, because you're tied to it and it means that you can iterate slowly over time. But the fact that I only have to find 2 interesting people every month, 24 in a year, actually, it's 23 because at the end of every year, I do a yearly best of episode that doesn't get a lot of people don't watch it very much, but I think is pretty cool, and I find it quite useful. I make these best of episodes at the end of, this is the last episode of the year. This year I wore a Christmas hoodie, and it's just, if you look at the chapters, it's just 12 episodes, 12 clips from 12 episodes of the year, and it makes basically the full length of an episode. So all of that to say, it's 23 episodes a year, and what that means is I can be picky with whoever I want to talk to. If I had to make 52 or 104 episodes a month, there's not that many people to talk to that are interesting in this field. Even the bigger podcasts that are talking to everybody on every topic, the Lex Friedmans, the Joe Rogans, even stuff like Oprah, stuff like that. They can't keep up with interesting people all the time. Or at least it's really, really hard, and they're doing that full time and everything. This is a side project. I'd love for it to become a very big thing, for me at least. But I think it's a feature that I don't have to talk to that many people because I can be picky. It's not like I always have to funnel people in and oh my God, who's the next episode? There's definitely part of that. But I think it's just enough that it forces me to reach out to other people and to seek out basically what is the world doing today? What are some projects that I haven't heard of? I'm actively going to go look at into the world what projects are out there because I have a few episodes that I don't know who I'm going to talk to. I mentioned previously about trying to have Joe Morrison on again. Or Aravind, who asked some of these questions. These are people that, Aravind, I've had him twice on the podcast. Joe, I'd love to have him again. I want to develop relationships with people where they go and do things in the world, and it's worth every few years because there's development to have these conversations again and to iterate like, hey, what did you do? What has changed? I would love to stay in a place where this whole thing can be sustainable, financially sustainable. And I don't have to be in your feed every 5 minutes because I just want to be there when I have something interesting to say. You don't need to see my face all the goddamn time. I would love to be able to keep doing it only when it really makes sense. And I think right now it's a good place. It's a good balance. And sometimes it's a bit hard to figure out like who am I going to talk to, but I think it's a roughly good balance. So I sincerely take it that you think that that I have a talent for picking people. Reading some of the other messages, I love the variety of people as well. Sometimes I wonder if you're ever going to run out of candidates. As long as people make cool stuff and want to talk to me about it, I think it's going to be okay. But maybe one day it will. And you know what? I don't know how it's going to go. But if I were to throw my future self under the bus, I would like to think, I don't know if it's going to happen, but I would like to think that the day where I feel like, you know what, this is not working, I'll just hang the coat. Because I think not everything needs to last forever. And I don't see an end in mind. And I would love to make this in a sustainable way. And sustainable means also sustainable amount of ideas. Like there's just only so many projects and interesting people to talk to. But, you know, over the last 3 years, I've discovered more and more projects and more people. And there's just so much interesting things that I think are worth talking about that so far it's not going to happen. But maybe one day it will. Or maybe I get tired and I think it's okay. I want to normalize like projects being like, you know what, I'm done. And you don't have to sell the company to someone. Like you just say, hey, okay, I'm done. Like stop. That means saying no to a bunch of money. But I think the people that are able to do that, I look up to a lot. The people that are at the top of what they're doing and they're like, you know what, I'm actually I'm just done. I think that'd be pretty cool. We'll see what happens. There are some pretty good other educational videos out there. Just an idea. Perhaps you could vet them and add them to your site, sort of create a Minds Behind Maps approved educational section. Curation, I think, is going to become so important. I write. Every once in a while, I write. I have a newsletter. You can find it. I promise this is going to make sense. If you go to mindsbehindmaps.com, there's a section on newsletter, and I write my newsletter. So here, the reason I mention this is because a few months ago, I wrote about this. I wrote this blog post called "Online Existential Crisis." It's about OpenAI's Sora. So if you haven't seen Sora, well, I mean, I don't know how you haven't heard about it because it was just everywhere. And it's like, hey, look, we've just made these generative videos. This is an AI that made this. Why am I talking about this? Because I freaked out. I was like, whoa, what does that mean? I don't know where it is. It doesn't matter. You can go read it. But what I said in here was that I think trust is going to become way more important in the future. Trust and actually trust in the sense of I'm not going to just look at a feed. I'm going to try to go look for sources that I think have something interesting to say. When the internet is just the signal to noise ratio drops, when the noise is so high, it's hard to find the signal. I think you're going to try to go find sources of people that have a very, very high signal to noise ratio. You're going to find people where every time this person says something, it's interesting, or at least it's worth paying attention to. And maybe not everything, but just more than on average. And I think that means individual people. And so part of what I do already on that newsletter is that I every few sometimes, so here's November. I share like some reads and findings that I've had. So it's not a seal of approval by any means. It's I found this interesting. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't necessarily think it's good. Most oftentimes I agree with it and I think it's good, but that's not the point. The point is I found something interesting, of value, that made me think that you might want to take a look at as well. And it's the reason why I ask people for books and podcast recommendation at the end of every episode. It's because and why it's in the show notes of every episode. If you go to the bottom of every episode in the show notes, there's the books and podcasts that people talk about, because I think that's interesting that I don't want like what books did people also buy from Amazon. I don't care. I want people to tell me, what did you find interesting? Why was The Storyteller by Dave Grohl so good? I listened to the audiobook. It's really good. I also recommend it. But Volodymyr told me why he thinks it's interesting. And that makes a case for why you might want to listen to that audiobook or read that book. And I think that's going to just become more of the case. I hope so. I hope that as the internet keeps getting shittier and shittier, there's a bit more of that. And if I can create a little bubble of space on the internet where that happens for maps, then I'll be happy. Marlene, I also think it's good balance, because as a fan, you can actually keep up the pace. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of people that just post way too much stuff. But I don't know. It's you make things for different people, hey? Okay, so Case then asks, to get back to the question of like, what if you could start over again? What would you do differently? So, when I started, I think I mentioned that earlier. When I started 3 years ago, I was living in Finland, and it was the pandemic, and I published this, episode 0, Initializing Experiment. I listened to this morning, and oh my God, is it ever cringe. But that's how you know it's getting better, I guess. I put this out because I was so excited. I was so excited that Ian Schuler, not Woodhouse, that's the star. Ian Schuler, episode number 1, it came out 3 days later. You know why it came out 3 days later? Because that's how long it took for me to figure out how to edit it and put it all together. I was so excited that there was only one episode that was ready. The next episode was a few weeks later. Will Cadell from Spark Geo, also incredibly thankful. The moment the first episode came out, this is a bit annoying. The moment the first episode came out, I did not have a second episode lined up. I was like, this is so cool that this CEO of this company decided to talk to me for an hour, nearly 2 hours. Here, an hour and 47 minutes. I just put it out there and I'll be like, I'll figure it out. And yeah, I don't know if I do that exactly the same, but there's also value in just being excited about things and just figuring out as you go. I don't know, that I'm excited when people try stuff. Not everything has to be matured and thought through. There's way too much optimization of like, I'm going to make a business out of this. Not everything needs to be like that. The thing that was most important, I think, was to iterate over time. I listened to this first experiment, initializing experiment, sorry. And sometimes I listen to like older episodes, and I noticed like things were rougher, and like I don't like how I talk, and I hope that in 3 years I listen back to this and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so annoying to listen to. Like I can't. I hope things are better, because I think building something where you can iterate on is so much better than trying to get it right the first time. And so if I could start over, I don't really know. I think I just start. I was lucky that when I started the podcast, I think the single best thing that happened to me was that I had a bit of a following on Twitter. I still mourn the days of when I joined Twitter, because I joined Twitter when there was a whole community of people in France that really loved aerospace stuff, and there was just a bunch of space nerds in Paris, and they were all on Twitter, and it was amazing. And that is why I had a bit of a Twitter following. Okay, here is what I wanted to show. Give me a minute. Okay, here's the all-time downloads of the podcast. Here's how many people have listened to the podcast since it came out. This is the RSS. There's about this much as well on YouTube. So the podcast has been listened to half a nothing, 50,000 times. Well, downloaded. Doesn't mean people actually listen to it. And it has about 60,000 views all time on YouTube. The first day it came out, April 14th, 2021, 8 downloads. I thought that was amazing that like anybody actually even clicked on the link and listened. Next day, 48. Next day, 77. Like we're talking like nearly 100 people on the third day, and I hadn't even posted a first episode yet. And then I post the first episode, 58, 68, 47. That was amazing. Like, what, there's actually people who are, I don't even know if they listen to, but like that surge coming from Twitter and from LinkedIn was insane. Like, I'm going to put out a little thing on the internet that I made, and I was super excited about it. But just because I'm excited about it doesn't mean it's any good or like people would care about it. But that curve has gotten slowly better over time and grown. It's not just about the numbers. It's about like, I think I've gotten better at listening to people. And I think I've gotten better at trying to explain why this guest is interesting and you might want to listen to them. And I think I've gotten a little bit better at asking questions. It's not just about the numbers. I don't control the numbers, but I control how good I think I can be at having these conversations. And I think you can only do that through iterating. Just in case people are interested in meeting you face to face, are there any conferences or other events you plan to participate in the next 12 months? I don't know. Conferences are great, but half of them, 3/4 of the interesting ones are in the US, and I just don't have the money to be able to do that. I went to SAT Camp in October. It was incredible. And the only reason I could do it is because the team at SAT Camp was able to pay for half of my ticket. And my job helped pay some of it as well. And then I paid the rest of it out of pocket. So I don't know. Conferences take a lot of time. I think they're very cool. I would love to go to more. It's the only like geospatial conference I went to. I haven't gone to any other conference for geospatial stuff. This is also why I get excited about the internet, is because the barrier to entry is so much lower. It's also why I try to record in person, because I find conferences really hard to attend at this point in my life, at least. It's hard for me to justify, even if I get really, really, really excited to meet people all the time. We are at about 1 hour and 35 minutes. And I've answered 4 questions plus a few of them in the chat. Thank you so much for listening. If there's a few other ones that you want to answer, I'd be happy to. Let me know what you thought about this. This is the first time that I'm trying to do this. Usually I don't have to change screens, pull stuff up at the same time. This is a very fun format, very fun exercise for me to do as well. I might try this again sometime. And yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's very cool that people decide to do that. I will just hang around for a few more minutes because I know there's a delay. I think there's a delay in how the stream works. So I'm just going to look through my notes, see if there's anything else that I wanted to go over. In the meantime, if there's anything that you would like to ask, please go ahead and do that. There's a new episode that's going to come out tomorrow because tomorrow is the 15th. So there's going to be a new episode. I hope there's going to be 3 more years of this podcast, 3 more years of conversation. And if not, we'll see what happens. If you have any questions, if you want to reach out, there's a form on the website. I don't know how long that form is going to stay up. Because there's a contact page here. You can put your first name, last name, email, and then put a message. I've put this thing, occasional complaints about map projections are also tolerated. I like putting little Easter eggs here and there. So far, nobody's seen that. So if you want to make my day and send me a complaint about why you think X or Y map projection sucks, you can do it there. I might pull this off because I'm actually getting more like corporate people asking me to have their whatever projects on more than anything. You can also just reach out on Twitter. Also don't know how long I'll have Twitter for. I think this is really cool. I will get an email, and I think email is also underrated. Email is very cool. So if you want to reach out, you can do that. Watch the episodes on YouTube, support on Patreon. There's behind the scenes stuff that are pretty cool. And Aravin's is not too far. Yeah, Aravin is making, I think it's called EO Summit conference. It's very cool. Look at that. That's incredibly exciting. I am so glad that what Aravin is doing is amazing. It's in London in June. It's the Eurostar is under construction, so going to London is tricky at the moment from mainland Europe. And there's just so many stuff to do. Conferences are really not something I've prioritized at this point in my life. I think I just much prefer hanging out with people whenever I can. And maybe I need to change my mind on that, but I don't know. Yeah. I think this was awesome. We know you really well from listening to your podcast, but you don't hear us. This is a nice tag up. Yeah, this is why I was wanting to try to do this. Thanks for sending stuff in the chat. Thanks for hanging around. This is very cool. So have a nice end of your day. And this is where I would love to have the tagline music. I really like that music. But hey, either way, thank you so much for listening. Have a good one.